Services. Mike Sargent, BBC News, York.
Well, let's find out how this is going to affect different parts of the country. In a moment, we'll go to Louise Hubble. She's in Dorset for us. First, though, let's speak to Mike Sargent, who is in York. Mike.
Yes, hello. Well, councils across England are waiting a bit anxiously this afternoon for the financial settlement. They're going to see average cuts of about 10% next year. That's roughly what they're expecting here in York. But overall, the settlement is going to be the toughest, say experts, since the Second World War. Well, let's talk to two people whose organisations might be affected by all of this. David Smith, the General Manager of Our Celebration, a mental health charity. But first, Angela Harrison of York Council Voluntary Services. You work with lots of voluntary groups here in York. What's going to be the impact for you?
Well, groups are very concerned about potential cuts to their funding. Charities work on very tight budgets as it is, and if they could find another 10 to 15% off their budgets, then they would have done that already. So groups are very concerned about potential cuts. And
you think the cuts are essential, or do you think that the cuts are unjustified, that nothing should be cut?
We sympathise with the local authority because they're in a very difficult position having to find such cuts, but we would urge them to take a long-term view, particularly of their funding of the voluntary sector, because it's the short-term nature of the cuts that will prove most difficult for groups.
OK, David Smith, you're a voluntary mental health organisation, so you share similar concerns, I take.
We do, yes. I mean, we've been running for 20-odd years, and we've always had a very good partnership with the local authority. We're hopeful that in light of the cuts that we know they're going to have to make, they do it sensibly, they do it intelligently, and they don't just slice cuts across the board, but try and look at the impact that the cuts are going to make and how it's going to affect the more vulnerable people in the city.
OK, the government says it's combining these cuts with a new push for localism, the so-called big society. Now, that's your big opportunity, isn't it, for voluntary groups to step in where services can't anymore be provided by local authority?
It is indeed, and what we've been doing has been part of big society for a long time. We're very encouraged by what the government's saying about big society, and we want to be part of it, but to recognise that in order to do that, we do need some resources.
So big society is not that easy, given that funding is shrinking?
Big society is not free, and that's what government needs to remember.
So, I mean, we're seeing what the government calls this radical programme of pushing power out from Whitehall. You would sympathise with some of those objectives, but like David, money is very, very tight, so it's going to be hard to realise.
I think the areas around public service delivery and asking charities to take on that work, organisations are very interested in doing that, but they need to be secure in their future and confident that they can survive into the future in order to take on those services.
OK, thank you both very much for joining us here in York. Now, ministers say they can do more for less and are encouraging local authorities to do so, but others, of course, see only a government that's trying to spread around the pain and the blame. Well, let's get a slightly different perspective on all of this with Louise Hubble, my colleague who is in Dorset. Louise.
Thank you very much, Mike. I'm here at the New Inn near Bridport, and this is an example of a facility that's been taken over by the local community.